I'm Francesca, 27 years old, and I recently finished design school. I moved back to my hometown to be closer to family, especially my mom. I was so excited to help renovate her apartment and get to live there too. We've always had a good relationship, though. Sometimes it's complicated. I never thought my own mother would put money over our relationship. Before I dive into what happened, let me know where you're watching from and hit subscribe if you've ever had family take advantage of your kindness. I grew up in a middle-class family in Seattle with parents who seemed happy enough until I was 14. That's when my world shifted dramatically. My parents decided to divorce, and it hit all of us hard, especially my mom, Lisa. She took it personally, as if my father's departure was a reflection on her worth. I became her emotional support during those years, probably taking on more than any teenager should. When it came time for college, I had my heart set on attending design school in Chicago. It had one of the best interior design programs in the country, and I'd dreamed of going there since I was 16. Mom wasn't thrilled about it. She wanted me to stay local, attend the University of Washington, and continue being her support system. "Francesca, why do you need to go so far away?" she'd asked the night I got my acceptance letter. "There are perfectly good schools right here in Seattle." I explained my reasons, and eventually she reluctantly supported my decision, though not without making me feel guilty about it. That was the first time I realized our relationship had some unhealthy patterns, but I was too young to know how to address them. The 6 years I spent in Chicago were transformative. I learned so much about design, about myself, and about building a career in a competitive field. I maintained a long-distance relationship with my family, calling Mom weekly and visiting during holidays. During those years, my younger brother Jake seemed to become the favorite by default, since he stayed local for college and was physically present. All through this time, Mom continued to live in the same two-bedroom apartment she'd moved into after the divorce. It was in a decent neighborhood, but the place itself hadn't been updated in 20 years. The wallpaper was peeling in the bathroom, the kitchen cabinets were falling apart, and the whole place had that tired, worn-down feeling of a space that's been neglected. Last year, when I was nearing graduation, Mom started dropping hints about me moving back to Seattle. "The design scene in Seattle is booming," she'd say during our calls. "And wouldn't it be nice to be closer to family again?" The idea started to grow on me. Chicago had been wonderful, but I did miss the Pacific Northwest. And as much as our relationship had its challenges, I loved my mom and wanted to rebuild our connection as adults. So I started looking into job opportunities in Seattle. During one of our conversations, Mom suggested something that seemed perfect at the time. "You know, Francesca, you could stay with me while you get established back in Seattle," she offered. "The guest bedroom is small, but it would save you from paying crazy rent prices right off the bat." I was touched by the offer. "That's so generous, Mom. I'd pay rent, of course." "Oh, just something modest," she said. "Maybe $700 a month. That would help me with the mortgage, but it's much less than you'd pay elsewhere." Then she added the part that really excited me. "And maybe you could help spruce this place up a bit with your design skills. Nothing fancy, but it's been so long since anything was updated." I immediately saw the potential. This could be a perfect arrangement for both of us. I'd have an affordable place to live while starting my career in Seattle, and Mom would get the benefit of having a professional designer update her tired apartment. Plus, working on the project together could help us rebuild our relationship. "I love that idea," I told her enthusiastically. "I could create a whole portfolio piece out of the renovation, and we could do a lot of the work ourselves to save money." Mom seemed equally excited, and we started making plans right away. I gave notice at my part-time job in Chicago and secured a remote position with a small design firm that would allow me to work from Seattle. I packed up my apartment, said goodbye to my Chicago friends, and drove across the country with everything I owned in my small Honda Civic. When I arrived in Seattle, Mom greeted me with open arms. She'd cleaned out the guest bedroom and bought me a welcome home gift basket with my favorite snacks and a new set of towels. It felt like a fresh start for both of us, and I was filled with hope for this new chapter in our lives. "I'm so glad you're home, Francesca," she said as we hugged. "This is going to be wonderful for both of us." I truly believed her. I had no idea what was really coming. The guest bedroom was even smaller than I remembered from my childhood visits, barely fitting a twin bed and a small desk where I could work. But I didn't mind. This was temporary, and I was more focused on the potential of renovating the apartment than on my immediate comfort. The day after I arrived, I did a thorough assessment of the apartment's condition. It was worse than I remembered from my visits. The laminate countertops in the kitchen were bubbling up at the seams. The vinyl flooring was cracked and peeling in several places. The bathroom fixtures were all from the early 90s, and the living room carpet had seen better days decades ago. But I saw all of this as an exciting challenge rather than a problem. I took measurements and photos of every room, then sat down to create a detailed renovation plan. I estimated that with about $8,000 in materials and a lot of DIY work, we could transform the apartment into something modern and beautiful. I presented my plan to Mom over dinner that night. "I think we could do this in 3 months if we're efficient," I explained, showing her my sketches. "And I'm willing to put in the $8,000 for materials as my contribution on top of the rent." Mom leafed through my sketches with growing excitement. "This looks amazing, Francesca. You really have a talent for this." The next day, we went shopping for materials together. I had carefully selected affordable but stylish options for everything from cabinet hardware to light fixtures. Mom seemed enthusiastic at first, agreeing with most of my choices. But as we continued shopping, I noticed her becoming more controlling about the decisions. "I don't think that backsplash tile works for me," she said, pointing to the subway tile I'd selected. "Let's go with this one instead." She indicated a mosaic that was not only more expensive but would clash with the overall design scheme I'd created. "That one's beautiful, Mom, but it doesn't quite fit with the cohesive look we're going for." I tried to explain. "The subway tile is classic and will still look current years from now." She gave me a tight smile. "Well, it's my kitchen, Francesca. I should have the final say, don't you think?" I wanted to argue that it was our project together and that I was the one with the design education, but I swallowed those words. I wanted this to be a bonding experience, not a power struggle. So I agreed to her choice, even though it meant rethinking several other design elements to make it work. That pattern continued throughout the renovation process. I would present carefully considered design choices, and Mom would override some of them seemingly at random, often choosing more expensive options that didn't necessarily work better. Since I was paying for the materials, this became frustrating, but I kept reminding myself that it was her home and that our relationship was more important than perfect design coherence. For 3 months, I worked on the renovation nights and weekends while maintaining my remote job during weekdays. I tore out old cabinets, installed new ones, painted walls, and even learned to tile from YouTube videos. Mom would help occasionally, but mostly she watched and made suggestions or changes midway through projects. The kitchen transformation was dramatic. We replaced the old laminate countertops with butcher block, installed new cabinet fronts rather than replacing the entire cabinets. To save money, put in a new sink and faucet, and added open shelving on one wall. Despite Mom's choice of an ornate backsplash tile, the overall effect was charming and much more functional. The bathroom got a complete facelift, too. I retiled the shower, installed a new vanity, and replaced the old medicine cabinet with a modern framed mirror. The dated wallpaper came down, replaced by a fresh coat of pale blue paint that made the small space feel larger and more serene. In the living room, I convinced Mom to let me pull up the old carpet. Underneath, we discovered the original hardwood floors. They needed refinishing, which was an unexpected expense, but the result was so worth it. The room looked twice as large and infinitely more elegant once the floors were restored to their original glory. Throughout the renovation, Mom's friends would visit and marvel at the transformation. I noticed that Mom often spoke about the changes as if they were her own vision. "Yes, I decided to go with open shelving in the kitchen," she told her friend Susan. "It makes the space feel so much more open, don't you think?" I bit my tongue. It had actually been my suggestion, one that Mom had initially resisted until I showed her examples of how it would look. Even more unsettling were the conversations I overheard when Mom didn't know I was listening. One evening, I was coming back from taking out the trash when I heard her on the phone. "The apartment looks amazing now," she was saying. "I bet it's increased in value by at least $30,000. That's the thing about renovations, they're such a good investment." I paused outside the door, feeling uncomfortable. She was talking about the renovation purely in terms of financial gain, not as the labor of love I'd seen it as. And she hadn't mentioned that I was the one who had designed everything and put in most of the physical labor, not to mention paid for all the materials. Around this time, my younger brother Jake and his new wife Megan started visiting more frequently. Jake had never shown much interest in Mom's apartment before, but suddenly he and Megan were dropping by almost weekly to see the renovation progress. "Wow, this place is really coming together," Jake said during one visit, running his hand along the new butcher block countertop. "Much nicer than our rental." Megan nodded in agreement. "I love what you're doing with the space, Francesca. You have such a good eye." At least they acknowledged that I was the one doing the work, which was more than Mom sometimes did. But there was something in their tone, a hint of envy perhaps, that made me slightly uneasy. As the renovation neared completion, the tensions with Mom escalated. We had our first major argument over the living room furniture arrangement. "The sofa should go against that wall," Mom insisted, pointing. "But that blocks the natural flow of the room," I explained. "And it means the TV would be at an awkward angle from the reading chair." "It's how I've always had it," she said firmly. "But the room has changed now," I pointed out. "The space works differently with the open floor plan we created." What should have been a simple discussion somehow escalated into a heated argument with Mom, eventually bringing up unrelated issues from years ago, like the time I'd forgotten to call on her birthday while I was in college. "You've always been selfish about getting your way," she said, words that stung deeply. I retreated to my tiny bedroom that night, wondering why such a small disagreement had triggered such a disproportionate response. Little did I know this was just foreshadowing of the much larger conflict to come. After 3 exhausting but rewarding months, the major renovation elements were finally complete. The apartment looked like something out of a design magazine, with clean lines, thoughtful details, and a cohesive aesthetic, despite some of the compromises I'd had to make along the way. I spent an entire day photographing the before and after results for my portfolio. The transformation was stunning, even more dramatic when seen in direct comparison. The dark, dated apartment had become bright, modern, and inviting. I felt immensely proud of what I'd accomplished both as a designer and as a daughter helping her mother. To celebrate the completion, I suggested we have a special dinner. I cooked Mom's favorite meal, salmon with roasted vegetables, and bought a nice bottle of wine. During dinner, I noticed Mom seemed unusually quiet, responding to my cheerful conversation with only brief comments. "Is everything okay?" I asked as we finished eating. "Everything's fine," she said, though her tone suggested otherwise. "The apartment looks very nice." Just very nice. After all the work I'd put in, I felt a twinge of disappointment, but brushed it aside. Mom was probably just tired. The renovation had disrupted her routine for months after all. The next morning, I was making coffee in our beautiful new kitchen when Mom came in, already fully dressed, though it was barely 7 o'clock. "Francesca, we need to talk about the rent situation," she said without preamble. I turned to face her coffee mug in hand. "What about it? I've paid on time every month." In fact, I'd often paid early, wanting to be a responsible tenant despite our family relationship. "Well," she said, not quite meeting my eyes, "now that the apartment has been renovated, it's worth considerably more." There was a pause as the implication of her words sank in. Are you saying you want to raise my rent?" I asked, disbelief coloring my voice. "The market rate for an apartment like this would be much higher than what you're paying," she said, her tone businesslike. "I'm thinking 1,200 would be fair." I nearly dropped my coffee mug. 1,200, that's almost double what we agreed on. "The apartment is worth much more now," she repeated as if that explained everything. "Mom, I just spent $8,000 renovating this place," I reminded her, struggling to keep my voice level. "Plus all the hours of labor. I designed everything, did most of the work myself, all while paying rent and working full-time." She waved a dismissive hand. "That was your choice to spend that money. You got to create a portfolio piece out of it which will help your career, and you've been living here below market rate for 3 months. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. "We had an agreement. I moved across the country based on that agreement." "Circumstances change," she said simply. "The apartment is worth more now, and I need to think about my retirement. I can't just give you a free ride forever." "A free ride." I echoed, my voice rising despite my efforts to stay calm. "I've been paying rent plus investing thousands in improvements to your property. Improvements that stay with you after I move out and increase your property value." The argument escalated from there. Mom accused me of being financially irresponsible for spending so much on the renovation. I pointed out that it was an investment in both our living space and my professional portfolio. She suggested I should have saved that money for my own place if I was going to complain about a reasonable rent increase. I reminded her that our agreement had been for modest rent specifically, so I could get established in Seattle before taking on a full market rate apartment. "You're just like your father," she finally snapped. "Always thinking about yourself, never considering other people's needs." That cut deep. I retreated to my room in tears, feeling betrayed on multiple levels. Not only was Mom going back on our agreement, but she was using my father as a weapon, knowing how much I'd struggled with his absence in my life. Later that day, I received a text from Jake. "Hey sis, heard you and Mom had a blowout. Everything okay?" I stared at the message in confusion. How did Jake know about our argument already? I hadn't told anyone, and I didn't think Mom would have reached out to him so quickly. "Just a disagreement about the apartment," I texted back. "How did you hear about it?" His response sent a chill through me. "Mom mentioned last week she was going to talk to you about raising the rent. Figured that conversation happened." Last week, that meant Mom had planned this conversation and had discussed it with Jake before ever bringing it up with me. While I was putting the finishing touches on the renovation, proudly showing her the completed spaces, she had been planning to ambush me with a massive rent increase. The next week was tense. Mom and I moved around each other like strangers, sharing a space, communicating only when absolutely necessary. I spent most of my time in my tiny bedroom, even eating meals there to avoid awkward encounters in the kitchen. I'd poured my heart into renovating. I was torn between anger at the betrayal and a desperate desire to preserve our relationship. Maybe I could afford the increase if I took on more design clients. But the principle of the thing still stung. We had made an agreement, and I had fulfilled my end of the bargain above and beyond what was expected. The renovation had significantly increased the value of Mom's property, all at my expense. I was still wrestling with these thoughts when the situation took an even more unexpected turn. After a week of uncomfortable silence, Mom approached me as I was working at my small desk in the guest bedroom. "I've been thinking about our discussion," she said, standing in the doorway. I turned to face her, hoping for an apology or at least a compromise. "Yes. I know the rent increase seemed sudden to you," she began, and for a moment I felt a surge of hope that she'd reconsidered. "So I want to propose a compromise." "I'm listening," I said cautiously. $2,100 per month, she stated as if she was offering me a tremendous bargain. I blinked at her, sure I had misheard. $2,100? That's triple what we agreed to, and more than the $1,200 you mentioned last week. "I've been researching rental prices in the area," she explained. "For a newly renovated two-bedroom apartment in this neighborhood, market rate would actually be around $2,400, so I'm giving you a family discount." I was speechless. This wasn't a compromise. It was an even more outrageous demand than the first one. "Mom, I can't afford that," I said when I finally found my voice. "I'm just starting out in my career. My remote position doesn't pay enough to cover that kind of rent." She shrugged. "You should have thought of that before spending so much on the renovation. Maybe you could take on some local clients to supplement your income, or find a higher-paying job now that you have this renovation in your portfolio." Her complete lack of empathy was stunning. "We had an agreement," I repeated, feeling like a broken record. "I moved back to Seattle based on that agreement. I spent my savings on improving your apartment based on that agreement." "Well, you didn't get anything in writing, did you?" she said, and my heart sank at the coldness in her voice. "And you should be grateful I'm not asking for a security deposit or first and last month's rent like other landlords would." I could hardly believe this was the same woman who had raised me, who had held me when I cried over my father leaving, who had sent me care packages during final exams in college. The person standing before me felt like a stranger wearing my mother's face. "I need to think about this," I said finally, not trusting myself to say more without breaking down completely. "Don't think too long," she replied. "I have other options if you decide not to stay." That cryptic comment lingered in my mind after she left. Other options. What did that mean? I found out the next day when I overheard Mom on the phone again, this time speaking to Jake. "Yes, Francesca's considering the new rent," she was saying. "But if she decides it's too much, the room would be available for you and Megan. Same deal we discussed, $1,000 per month." I froze outside the kitchen, unable to believe what I was hearing. Not only was Mom planning to triple my rent, but she was offering the same apartment to Jake and Megan for half that amount. My own brother was being offered a better deal to live in the space I had renovated with my own money and labor. When Mom ended her call, I confronted her immediately. "You're offering the apartment to Jake and Megan for $1,000. I demanded, not bothering to hide that I'd overheard her conversation. She had the grace to look slightly embarrassed, but only for a moment. "They're a young couple just starting out. They need help. And I'm also just starting out. I moved across the country to be closer to you, spent my savings renovating your apartment, and now you're not only tripling my rent, but offering the place to Jake for less." "Jake is family," she said defensively. "And what am I?" I asked, my voice breaking. "Aren't I family too?" The argument that followed was explosive. Years of unresolved issues came pouring out from both sides. Mom accused me of abandoning her when I went to Chicago for school. I pointed out that she had consistently favored Jake since the divorce. She claimed I was selfish like my father. I countered that she was manipulative and had planned this bait and switch all along. "You knew all along you were going to do this, didn't you?" I said, as the terrible realization dawned on me. "You lured me back to Seattle with the promise of affordable rent, knowing I'd renovate the apartment for you, and then planned to price me out so Jake and Megan could move in." "That's ridiculous," she huffed, but she wouldn't meet my eyes. "You've already shown them the apartment, haven't you?" "Probably while I was at work. They've already seen the renovations I paid for." Her silence was confirmation enough. "Did they pick out their furniture already? Plan where they're going to put their things in my room?" I was nearly shouting now, all the hurt and betrayal pouring out. "You need to calm down," Mom said coldly. "This is still my apartment. I can rent it to whoever I want for whatever price I set." Something broke inside me at those words. This wasn't just about the apartment or the money. It was about realizing that my own mother had used me, had manipulated me into spending my savings and countless hours improving her property, all while planning to turn around and offer it to my brother instead. I went to my room, pulled out a suitcase, and packed enough clothes for a few days. As I was leaving, Mom called after me. "Where do you think you're going? We're not finished discussing this." "I'm going to stay with Taylor for a while," I said, referring to my childhood friend who lived nearby. "I need some space to think." "Don't be dramatic, Francesca," she said dismissively. "We can work this out." But I was already closing the door behind me, tears streaming down my face as I carried my suitcase to my car. When I arrived at Taylor's apartment, my friend took one look at my face and opened her arms. I collapsed into her embrace, sobbing out the whole story. "I'm so sorry, Francesca," she said when I'd finished. "But I have to tell you something. Your mom has been talking about this to people for weeks." I looked up at her in confusion. "What do you mean?" Taylor hesitated, clearly uncomfortable. "I ran into your mom at the grocery store about 2 weeks ago. She was telling Susan that she was so excited about her newly renovated apartment and how Jake and Megan might be moving in soon. She made it sound like you were just temporarily staying there while doing the work, not that you had an ongoing arrangement." This new betrayal hit me like a physical blow. While I had been working myself to exhaustion renovating her apartment, believing I was building both a home and a stronger relationship with my mother, she had been planning my exit all along. "What am I going to do?" I whispered, feeling more lost than I had since my parents' divorce. Taylor squeezed my hand. "You're going to stay here as long as you need to. And then you're going to figure out your next steps because you're strong and talented and you deserve better than this." In that moment, I realized I needed to stop hoping my mother would suddenly become the person I needed her to be. It was time to create my own path forward without the manipulation and conditional love I'd been accepting for far too long. I spent the first day at Taylor's apartment just processing the betrayal. I cycled through grief, anger, disbelief, and a deep sense of hurt that left me physically exhausted. Taylor gave me space when I needed it and a listening ear when I was ready to talk. On the second day, I decided I needed to be proactive. If I couldn't live with my mother under these new terms, and it was clear I couldn't then, I needed to find my own place. I opened my laptop and began searching Seattle's rental market. The options were disheartening. Seattle's rental prices had skyrocketed in recent years, and finding anything affordable near the city center seemed impossible. Most one-bedroom apartments were going for over $2,000 a month, and even studios were commanding $1,700 or more. Given my entry-level remote position and the fact that I'd spent most of my savings on the renovation, these prices felt out of reach. But I was determined not to give up. I expanded my search to neighboring areas, looked at older buildings, and scoured every listing site I could find. For 5 days straight, I spent every spare moment hunting for apartments and scheduling viewings. Some places were obvious no's as soon as I walked in. Mold in the bathroom, non-working appliances, or sketchy neighborhoods made them easy to eliminate despite their lower prices. Other units were beautiful but wildly over budget. I began to understand why Mom's initial offer of $700 a month had seemed so appealing. Just when I was starting to lose hope, I found a promising listing. It was a small studio in an older building about 20 minutes from downtown. The price was at the very top of what I could afford, $1,400 a month. But the location was decent, and the building appeared well-maintained from the outside. When I went to view the unit, the manager showed me into a space that was only about 400 square feet, but it had good bones, hardwood floors under the worn carpet, big windows that let in plenty of light, and a tiny but functional kitchen. The bathroom needed updating, and the whole place could use fresh paint, but I immediately saw the potential. Drawing on my design training and the confidence I'd gained during the renovation of Mom's apartment, I approached the building manager with a proposal. "I noticed the unit needs some updating," I said. "I'm actually an interior designer, and I'd be willing to make improvements to the space in exchange for a reduction in rent for the first 6 months. The manager looked skeptical. "What kind of improvements?" I outlined my vision, removing the old carpet to reveal and refinish the hardwood floors, painting the walls, updating the bathroom vanity, and a few other cosmetic changes that would significantly improve the space without requiring major construction. "I can show you my portfolio," I offered, pulling up the photos of Mom's renovation on my phone. "This is a recent project I completed." The manager's eyes widened as he swiped through the before and after photos. "You did all this?" "I designed it and did most of the work myself," I confirmed. "And I'd be willing to do similar improvements here at my own expense if we can negotiate on the rent." After some back and forth, we reached an agreement. I would pay $1,200 a month for the first 6 months instead of $1,400, with the understanding that any improvements I made would stay with the apartment when I eventually moved out. It wasn't a huge savings, but it would help offset the cost of materials, and more importantly, it would give me a place of my own. With a signed lease in hand, I finally returned to Mom's apartment to collect the rest of my belongings. I'd been staying with Taylor for over a week, and Mom had sent several texts ranging from angry demands that I come home to manipulative messages about how hurt she was that I'd abandoned her. I hadn't responded to any of them, needing time to process and make my plans before facing her again. When I walked in, Mom was sitting in the living room reading a magazine. She looked up with an expression that mixed relief and irritation. "Finally decided to come home, I see," she said, as if I'd been out late rather than gone for over a week. "I'm not staying," I said quietly. "I found my own place. I'm here to get my things." She put down the magazine. "Don't be ridiculous, Francesca. Where are you going to go that's better than here? I was just trying to test your commitment." Test my commitment. After all I'd done to renovate her apartment, I bit back an angry retort, determined not to get pulled into another emotional confrontation. "I signed a lease on a studio," I said instead. "I'm moving out by the end of the week." "A studio," she scoffed. "After living in this beautiful space that you helped create, you're going to throw that all away because I asked for fair market rent." "You didn't ask for fair market rent," I corrected her. "You asked for 3 times what we agreed to while offering Jake the same apartment for half that amount. It's clear this isn't about market rates. It's about manipulation." Her face hardened. "I was just trying to help Jake and Megan get started. They're family." "And I'm not," I asked again, the hurt evident in my voice, despite my efforts to remain calm. She didn't answer that question directly. "You're making a mistake. You'll regret throwing away family over money." The irony of that statement was breathtaking, considering she was the one who had put money over our relationship. But I didn't point that out. Instead, I simply went to my room and began packing my belongings. The next few days were tense as I moved my things out piece by piece. Mom alternated between giving me the cold shoulder and making guilt-inducing comments about my selfishness and overreaction. I tried to stay focused on the task at hand, reminding myself that soon I would be in my own space, free from these manipulation tactics. One afternoon, I came back to get another load of my things and found Jake and Megan in the apartment measuring the guest room that had been mine. "Oh, hi, Francesca," Megan said awkwardly when she saw me. "We didn't know you'd be here." "Just getting some more of my stuff," I said, trying to keep my tone neutral, even though the sight of them measuring for furniture placement felt like salt in an open wound. Jake at least had the decency to look uncomfortable. "Mom said you found your own place." "Yes, a studio not far from here." I didn't volunteer any more information. "That's great," he said with forced enthusiasm. "More space for you than this small room, right?" We both knew that wasn't true. My new studio was smaller than this bedroom and the shared spaces I'd had access to at Mom's, but I wasn't going to get into that with him. On my final day, I returned my key to Mom. Before leaving, I took photos of all the renovation work I'd done for my portfolio. It felt bittersweet documenting these beautiful spaces that I'd poured my heart and savings into, knowing I would no longer get to enjoy them. "I hope you'll reconsider this decision," Mom said as I prepared to leave. "Families should stick together." "I agree," I said softly, "which is why your choices hurt so much." As I turned to go, she delivered one final blow. "You'll regret throwing away family over money, just like your father did." I didn't respond to that. I simply walked out the door, got into my car, and drove to my new apartment. It was small, still needed work, and felt empty compared to the fully furnished space I'd left behind. But it was mine. And as I sat on my air mattress that first night, I felt a strange mixture of sadness and liberation. The studio became my sanctuary and my canvas. I threw myself into small renovation projects, starting with pulling up the old carpet to reveal the hardwood floors beneath. Sanding and refinishing them was hard work, but therapeutic in its way. Each stroke of the sander felt like I was also smoothing away some of the hurt from my mother's betrayal. I painted the walls a soft, warm white that made the space feel larger and brighter. I found an affordable vanity at a salvage yard and installed it in the bathroom, immediately upgrading the space. Each improvement was a statement I could create beauty on my own terms without manipulation or conditional approval. After a month in my new apartment, I had transformed the tiny studio into a space that felt truly mine. It was smaller than what I'd had at Mom's, but every inch reflected my personal style and needs. The refinished floors gleamed, the fresh paint brightened the space, and carefully chosen furniture maximized both function and comfort in the limited square footage. I was starting to build a local client base as well. Using the photos of Mom's renovation in my portfolio had already attracted a few potential clients who wanted similar transformations for their homes. The irony wasn't lost on me that the very project that had led to so much personal pain was now helping launch my professional career in Seattle. My contact with Mom had been limited to occasional text exchanges, mostly her sending passive-aggressive messages about how quiet the apartment felt without me, or how Jake and Megan were so appreciative of the beautiful space. I kept my responses brief and neutral, still processing my feelings about everything that had happened. From Taylor, I learned that Jake and Megan had indeed moved into my old room shortly after I left. Apparently, they were paying $1,000 a month, exactly as Mom had offered them and exactly as I'd overheard. The confirmation of this double standard still stung, even though I'd already known it to be true. One evening, about a month after I'd moved out, I received an unexpected call from Mom. Seeing her name on my phone screen made my stomach tighten, but I answered anyway. "Hello." "Francesca, I'm looking at the utility bills from last month and I noticed you haven't paid your share." Mom's voice had that clipped, businesslike tone she used when discussing financial matters. I was momentarily speechless. "My share, Mom, I moved out a month ago." "Yes, but these bills are from when you were still living here, the electricity, water, and internet for last month. You used those services, so you should pay your portion." I couldn't believe what I was hearing. "Mom, I moved out on the 7th. I was only there for 1 week of the billing cycle." "Still, that's 1 week of utilities you used," she persisted. "Are you seriously calling me about 1 week of utilities after everything that happened?" My voice rose in disbelief. "After I spent $8,000 renovating your apartment, after you tripled my rent and then rented to Jake for half that amount." "This isn't about that," she said dismissively. "This is about paying your fair share." I've already divided the bill by 4 weeks and calculated your portion for that 1 week. It comes to $62.47. The absurdity of the situation struck me then. My own mother, who owned an apartment now worth significantly more thanks to my investment, was hounding me for $62. It was so petty, so transparently about control rather than money, that I actually laughed. "What's funny about this?" she demanded. "Mom, I'm not paying that bill," I said firmly when my laughter subsided. "Consider it a housewarming gift to Jake and Megan on top of the $8,000 renovation I already gifted you." "That's not how this works, Francesca. You can't just decide not to pay for services you used." "Actually, I can, and I am." I took a deep breath, realizing this was an opportunity to set boundaries I should have established long ago. "Mom, I'm not going to participate in these manipulative games anymore. You used me to renovate your apartment, then priced me out so Jake could move in. That's your choice to make as the property owner, but my choice is to move forward without these unhealthy dynamics." "How dare you accuse me of manipulation?" she sputtered. "After everything I've done for you. What exactly have you done for me recently? Mom offered me a place to stay under false pretenses, taken credit for my design work, tripled my rent after I invested my savings in your property. If that's your definition of helping me, I think I'm better off on my own." There was a long silence on the other end of the line. When she finally spoke, her voice was cold. "I see you're determined to paint yourself as the victim here. Fine, don't pay the bill, but don't expect any help from me in the future." "I won't," I said quietly. "Goodbye, Mom." After ending the call, I sat on my small sofa feeling shaky but somehow lighter. Standing up for myself and refusing to be manipulated had been difficult but necessary. I was setting the tone for our future relationship, making it clear that I would no longer accept the unhealthy patterns of the past. In the weeks that followed, I heard through family members that Mom was telling a very different version of events to anyone who would listen. In her version, I had refused to pay a reasonable rent, stormed out without warning, and was now refusing to pay bills I legitimately owed. Some relatives believed her story and sent me disapproving messages. Others reached out privately to hear my side of things. One particularly uncomfortable family dinner at my aunt's house brought the conflict into the open. Mom acted wounded and victimized the entire time, making pointed comments about ungrateful children and sacrifices parents make. When my aunt asked directly what had happened between us, the floodgates opened with both Mom and I presenting our perspectives on the situation. To my surprise, my aunt was skeptical of Mom's version. "Lisa, you let Francesca renovate your entire apartment at her expense, then tripled her rent. That doesn't sound fair to me." Mom bristled. "The apartment is worth more now. Why shouldn't I charge market rate? Because she's your daughter, and she's the one who made it worth more," my aunt pointed out reasonably. Later that evening, Jake and Megan arrived for dessert, and the tension increased. They were clearly uncomfortable being caught between Mom and me, but they also couldn't hide their satisfaction with their new living situation. "The apartment is really nice," Megan said, then quickly added, "Thanks to your amazing work, Francesca." "There are a few issues, though," Jake added. "The garbage disposal is making a weird noise, and one of the cabinet doors is a little loose." Mom immediately looked at me. "Francesca, maybe you could come take a look at those things, since you did the installation." I stared at her in disbelief. "You want me to come fix things in the apartment I was forced to leave for free?" "Well, if the installation wasn't done properly," she began. "No," I said firmly. "I'm not your free handyman. If something needs fixing, either do it yourself, have Jake do it, or hire someone. My time and skills have value." There was an awkward silence before my aunt quickly changed the subject. Later that week, Jake called me. This was unusual, as we hadn't been particularly close since I moved back to Seattle. "Hey, Francesca, got a minute?" He sounded uncomfortable. "Sure, what's up?" He sighed heavily. Well, I feel like I should tell you something about the apartment situation." "I'm listening," I said, curious about what had prompted this call. "Mom had been planning for Megan and me to move in for months," he admitted. "Even before you finished the renovation. She told us not to say anything to you because she didn't want to complicate things while the work was being done." Even though I had suspected as much, hearing the confirmation from Jake himself was still painful. "So you knew all along that she was going to price me out?" "Not exactly," he hedged. She said she was going to offer you a more appropriate rent first and that you'd probably choose to find your own place. She made it sound like it was your choice, not that she was forcing you out. And you were okay with that. I couldn't keep the hurt from my voice. I didn't know all the details, he said defensively. I didn't know how much you spent on the renovation or that she was going to triple your rent. She just said the new rent would reflect the improvements and that she was offering us a special rate because we're just starting out. I was just starting out too, Jake. That's why I moved in with her in the first place. There was a pause. Yeah, I know. I'm sorry, Francesca. I should have asked more questions. His apology felt inadequate given the circumstances, but at least he'd had the decency to call and admit what happened. It confirmed what I'd already suspected. Mom had planned this manipulation from the beginning, using me to renovate her apartment before replacing me with Jake and Megan at a preferential rate. After posting my renovation photos online as part of my portfolio, I started getting more attention from potential clients. One small design firm in Seattle even reached out to discuss possible projects. They were impressed with the before and after transformation of Mom's apartment and wanted to know if I'd be interested in taking on similar residential renovation projects for their clients. During our meeting, I was offered a position as a junior designer specializing in residential renovations. The salary was modest, but better than my remote position, and it came with the potential for growth and more creative control. I accepted enthusiastically, grateful for the opportunity and the validation of my work. Ironically, my first assigned project was for a client who lived just a few blocks from Mom's apartment. I felt a strange mix of emotions as I drove through the familiar neighborhood, passing close to the place I'd poured so much of myself into. But I focused on the task at hand, determined to channel my energy into this new opportunity, rather than dwelling on past hurts. One afternoon, as I was grocery shopping after work, I literally ran into Mom in the produce section. Our carts collided as we both reached for the same display of apples. Oh, I'm sorry. I began automatically, then froze as I recognized her. She seemed equally startled. Francesca. Mom. I acknowledged, suddenly very interested in selecting the perfect apple. An awkward silence stretched between us. Finally, she spoke. You look well. Thanks. I am well. I placed a few apples in a bag, avoiding her eyes. How are you? Fine, she said, then added, The apartment is still beautiful. Everyone comments on it. I nodded, unsure what to say to that. Should I thank her for the compliment to my work? Should I remind her that it was my design and labor she was receiving praise for? Before I could decide, she continued, Jake and Megan are having some issues with the place, though. The shower is leaking a bit and they can't figure out why. Of course, even in this chance encounter, she was angling for free help. There are plenty of good plumbers in Seattle, I said simply. Her lips tightened. I thought you might want to check it since you did the work. I'm not available for free repairs, Mom. I've moved on to paid design work now. I managed a small smile. In fact, I just started with a design firm here in Seattle. Oh. She seemed surprised, perhaps, that I'd landed on my feet without her help. That's good for you. Thanks. I should go. I have a client meeting this evening. This wasn't strictly true, but I needed to end this uncomfortable encounter. As I turned to leave, she called after me. Francesca, Jake, and Megan are having some difficulties with the living arrangements. I paused, looking back at her. What kind of difficulties? She sighed. They say I'm too involved in their day-to-day lives, too controlling about how they use the space. Can you imagine? I could imagine it all too well, but I kept that thought to myself. I'm sorry to hear that, I said neutrally. I was only trying to protect my investment, she added. After all the work we put into renovating. We. As if she had done equal work on the project. I bit my tongue. Anyway, she continued, they're talking about looking for their own place soon. I wondered if she was telling me this as some sort of peace offering or perhaps hoping I'd express interest in moving back. I did neither. I hope they find something that works for them, I said simply. Good seeing you, Mom. As I walked away, I felt both sadness and vindication. Jake and Megan were experiencing exactly what I had predicted Mom's controlling behavior, making the beautiful space ultimately uninhabitable. But the knowledge brought me no joy, only a resigned understanding that some patterns never change. 6 months after moving into my studio, I had transformed it into a showcase of what could be done with a small space. The hardwood floors gleamed, the custom storage solutions maximized every inch, and carefully chosen furniture and accessories created a space that felt both larger and more luxurious than its square footage would suggest. I'd taken before and after photos of the transformation, just as I had with Mom's apartment, and these had become an important part of my portfolio. Clients were particularly impressed by what I'd accomplished in such a limited space, and I'd begun to develop a specialty in small space design. My career was flourishing at the design firm. I'd been assigned increasingly important projects and had even brought in a few clients of my own. The skills I'd developed during Mom's renovation, both design and hands-on, had proven invaluable in my professional work. One evening, I received an unexpected call from Megan. We hadn't spoken since that awkward family dinner months ago. "Francesca, do you have a minute to talk?" She sounded stressed. "Sure, what's up?" I tried to keep my tone neutral, unsure what to expect. "Jake and I are moving out of your mom's apartment," she said without preamble. "We can't take it anymore." Despite having anticipated this based on what Mom had mentioned in the grocery store, I was surprised by the direct confirmation. "I'm sorry to hear that. What happened?" Megan sighed heavily. "She's impossible to live with. Nothing we do is right. She complains if we rearrange furniture, gets upset if we hang pictures, and comes into our space without knocking. Last week she actually replaced our bedding because she said the colors we chose clashed with the room's aesthetic." I couldn't help but feel a pang of vindication, though I tried not to let it show in my voice. "That sounds difficult." "It's been a nightmare," Megan continued. "And the worst part is, she keeps comparing everything to how Francesca did it. Nothing we do measures up to your standards, apparently." This was unexpected. "She says that, all the time, Francesca would have chosen a better color. Francesca kept the kitchen much cleaner. Francesca knew how to properly care for the hardwood floors." Megan's voice had taken on a mocking tone that I recognized all too well as Mom's. "I'm sorry she's putting you through that," I said sincerely. "Don't be sorry," Megan replied. "We should have listened to you from the beginning. Jake feels terrible about the whole thing. He realizes now that your mom manipulated the situation to get you to renovate before pushing you out." There was a pause before she continued. "Actually, that's part of why I'm calling. We found an apartment in the same building as yours. The manager mentioned you when we were touring the place, said you'd done amazing work on your unit." "Oh!" This was surprising news. "Yeah, we're moving in next week, and I was wondering, would you be willing to give us some design advice? Not for free," she added quickly. "We'd pay your consultation fee. We just really love what you did with your place from what the manager described." I was torn between lingering resentment over how they had benefited from my situation and sympathy for what they were now experiencing with Mom. In the end, professionalism won out. "I'd be happy to consult on your design," I said. "Send me your new address and we can set up a time next week." After hanging up, I sat thinking about the strange turn of events. Mom's apartment, which had caused so much pain and conflict, was apparently returning to its pre-renovation state without proper care. Jake and Megan, who had initially been part of Mom's plan to use me, were now experiencing her controlling behavior firsthand and seeking my professional help. Life had a peculiar way of coming full circle. A few days later, I received a text message that Mom was trying to reach me, but suspected I was ignoring her calls. She wasn't wrong. I'd been sending her calls to voicemail, not ready for another confrontation. The text came from my aunt, who suggested Mom had something important to discuss and asked if I would be willing to hear her out. After considerable thought, I agreed to meet Mom at a coffee shop neutral territory, where neither of us would have the home field advantage. When I arrived, Mom was already seated at a corner table, looking older and more tired than I remembered. She straightened when she saw me attempting a smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. "Francesca, thank you for coming." "Aunt Judy said it was important," I replied, sitting down across from her. Mom nodded, hands wrapped around her coffee mug as if seeking warmth. "Jake and Megan are moving out." "I heard," I said, simply not volunteering that I'd spoken directly with Megan. "The apartment is starting to show wear and tear," she continued. "The kitchen backsplash has some cracked tiles. The bathroom grout is discolored. The hardwood floors have lost their shine." I waited, unsure where this was heading. No one seems to know how to maintain the improvements properly, she added with a hint of accusation. Not like you did. Was this conversation just an attempt to get free maintenance work from me? I started to feel my walls go up again. Mom, if you're looking for repair advice, I can recommend some good contractors. That's not why I asked to meet, she said, then paused as if gathering courage. I wanted to acknowledge that I handled the situation with you poorly. I blinked in surprise. This was as close to an apology as I'd ever heard from her. I took advantage of your skills and generosity, she continued, and I didn't appreciate what you contributed to the apartment. Not really. I remained silent, not wanting to interrupt what seemed to be a difficult admission for her. Living with Jake and Megan has been enlightening, she said with a grimace. They don't care about the space the way you did. They don't notice details or take pride in maintaining things. They're not designers, I pointed out. No, but it's more than that. She sighed. They don't respect the work that went into creating that space. Your work. I nodded, acknowledging the point without commenting further. I miss having you around, she admitted finally. Not just for the maintenance help. I miss our conversations. I miss seeing your creativity in action. I even miss arguing about design choices. This was unexpected territory. Mom rarely expressed emotional vulnerability or admitted missing anyone. I appreciate you saying that, I said carefully. But a lot of trust was broken, Mom. You had me renovate your apartment under one set of expectations, then completely changed the terms once the work was done. I know. She looked down at her coffee. I convinced myself it was a business decision, that I deserved to get market rate for the improved space. But I was wrong to treat my daughter like a tenant I could exploit. The admission hung in the air between us. After a moment, she continued, I'm not asking you to move back in. I know that bridge is burned, but I'm hoping we might start rebuilding our relationship, on new terms, adult terms. I considered her words carefully. On the one hand, this was the most self-awareness Mom had shown in years. On the other, I wasn't sure I could trust that this change of heart would last. I'd be open to that, I said finally. But slowly, with clear boundaries. She nodded, seeming relieved. That's fair. More than fair, considering everything. As we finished our coffee, the conversation shifted to safer topics: my new job, a community garden project she'd joined, neutral family news. There was an awkwardness between us still, but also a tentative openness that hadn't been there before. When we parted, Mom hesitated before asking, would you be willing to come see the apartment sometime, just to advise on maintenance, not to do the work yourself? I'd pay your consultation fee, of course. The fact that she offered to pay felt like a small but significant acknowledgement of my professional value. I could do that, I agreed, after Jake and Megan move out. Thank you. She reached out as if to hug me, then seemed to think better of it and offered her hand instead. I took it briefly, appreciating the respect for boundaries this gesture represented. As I walked back to my car, I reflected on how much had changed in less than a year. I'd moved back to Seattle full of hope for strengthening my relationship with Mom, experienced a devastating betrayal, created a new life for myself, and now stood at the threshold of a potentially new, more honest relationship with her. The renovation that had caused so much pain had ultimately been the catalyst for tremendous growth, both professionally and personally. I had proven to myself that I could create beauty from difficult circumstances, stand firm in my boundaries, and build a life on my own terms. My tiny studio apartment had become more than just a living space. It was a symbol of my independence and resilience. The careful design choices I'd made there reflected not just my professional skills, but my personal values. Every corner held meaning because I had created it for myself, not to please someone else or fulfill their vision. As I unlocked my apartment door that evening, I felt a deep sense of peace. The space welcomed me home, a sanctuary I had created through my own efforts. It might be smaller than what I'd had at Mom's, but it was mine in every way that mattered. The renovation of my relationship with Mom would take much longer than the renovation of any physical space. It would require careful assessment, honest communication, removal of toxic elements, and patient rebuilding. There would be setbacks and moments of doubt, just as there are in any major renovation project. But for the first time in months, I felt hopeful that such a renovation might be possible. Not a return to what was before, but the creation of something new, more authentic, and built to last. The 6 months that followed my coffee shop conversation with Mom became a period of rebuilding, not just a relationship, but my entire understanding of family dynamics. The process was slow and sometimes uncomfortable, but ultimately healing in ways I hadn't anticipated. My studio apartment had become a showcase of my design abilities. The transformation was so dramatic that my landlord actually asked if he could show it to prospective tenants for other units as an example of what was possible with the space. I agreed on the condition that I receive a small referral fee for any new tenants who signed a lease after seeing my unit. He readily agreed, and this became an unexpected additional income stream. My career continued to flourish. The design firm promoted me to lead designer for small space renovations, a niche that was increasingly popular in Seattle's tight housing market. My own apartment served as both portfolio and laboratory, where I could test ideas before recommending them to clients. The first time Mom visited my studio about a month after our coffee shop meeting, I watched her expression carefully as she took in the space. There was surprise, then genuine admiration. "You've created something remarkable here, Francesca," she said, running her hand along the custom storage unit I'd designed to separate the sleeping area from the living space. "It feels twice as large as it actually is." "That was the goal," I acknowledged. "When space is limited, every design decision has to serve multiple purposes." She nodded, continuing to examine details. "The light in here is wonderful, and these built-ins are so clever." For the first time in our relationship, I felt Mom seeing my work with true appreciation, rather than calculation of how it could benefit her. It was a small moment, but significant. Our relationship progressed in small steps. We met for coffee or lunch every couple of weeks, gradually rebuilding trust through consistent, respectful interaction. There were still moments of tension when old patterns threatened to resurface, but we were both more aware of them now and better able to navigate around them. I did eventually consult on the maintenance issues at her apartment after Jake and Megan moved out. The place had indeed suffered from neglect. The beautiful hardwood floors were scratched and dull, the kitchen backsplash had several cracked tiles, and the bathroom grout was stained. It hurt to see my work deteriorating, but I provided Mom with detailed instructions for repairs and maintenance, which she followed without complaint. "I didn't realize how much ongoing care these upgrades required," she admitted during one visit. "You made it look so effortless when you lived here." "That's because I cared about preserving the work," I pointed out. "It wasn't just a place to live for me. It was a labor of love and a portfolio piece." She nodded thoughtfully. "I understand that now. Too late, but I do understand." Mom decided not to rent the apartment to anyone else for the time being. "I'm enjoying having the space to myself," she explained, "and I want to take better care of what you created here." This acknowledgement of my contribution meant more than I expected it would. It wasn't about the money or the work itself, but about being seen and valued for what I had given. As my design business grew, I occasionally encountered potential clients who had heard about my work through Mom. She had apparently begun showing off her daughter's renovation to friends and acquaintances, this time with proper credit given. "Your mom showed us her apartment," one new client told me during our first meeting. "She couldn't stop praising your work. Said you transformed the space completely and that you have an exceptional eye for detail." Hearing this felt like healing of a different kind, a public restoration of credit that had once been taken from me. The most profound lessons from this experience weren't about design or renovation, but about relationships and self-worth. I learned that true family support isn't conditional on compliance or convenience. I discovered my own resilience and ability to create beauty and order even in challenging circumstances. And I realized that sometimes the most important boundaries are the invisible ones that protect our sense of self from manipulation and exploitation. My relationship with Mom will never be perfect. We still have moments of misunderstanding and occasional tension, but it's now built on a foundation of mutual respect rather than the lopsided dynamic of my childhood and early adulthood. She sees me as a capable, independent adult with valuable skills and boundaries that deserve respect. And I see her as a flawed but evolving person capable of growth and change even at this stage of life. The small studio that began as a refuge from betrayal has become a launching pad for my career and a symbol of my independence. I've since been able to save enough for a down payment on a small condo which I'm currently renovating with the knowledge and confidence gained from these experiences. What happened with Mom's apartment was painful, but it forced me to value my own worth in ways I might never have otherwise. It taught me that true home isn't about square footage or fancy finishes, but about creating spaces both physical and emotional where we can be authentically ourselves. If you're dealing with family members who take advantage of your skills, time, or generosity, remember that setting boundaries isn't selfish. It's necessary for healthy relationships. And sometimes the most loving thing you can do for yourself and others is to stand firm in your worth. Have you ever had a family member take advantage of your professional skills or generosity? How did you handle it? Let me know in the comments below. And if this story resonated with you, please hit that like button and subscribe to hear more stories about navigating complicated family dynamics and creating spaces that honor your true self. Thank you for listening, and remember, the most important renovation we'll ever do is the one where we rebuild our understanding of our own value.